And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, January 6th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, the SNAP program is under pressure, and states are drowning in paper as new mandates kick in. Plus, technology emerges as the key for states to meet Medicaid work verification rules and avoid coverage gaps before the December 2026 deadline. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Defense Department is expanding secure methods of authentication beyond the traditional Common Access Card. This will give users more alternative options to log into its systems when CAC access is impractical or infeasible. A new Pentagon memo lays out when alternative multi-factor authentication tools can be used and updates the list of approved authentication tools for different system impact levels. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more details. Anastasia, great to have you on.
Hi, Terry.
Let's talk about this memo. What are some of the biggest changes that it introduces? This seems like a logical step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So this new memo builds on previous DoD policies on authentication, and that's where DoD approved alternative options to the CAC, things like RSA tokens. But with the new guidance, the department laid out more clearly under what circumstances users can log into DoD systems using something other than the CAC. And at the same time, they outlined what tools can be used at different impact levels and applications. So, for instance, if you're in the early stages of the recruiting process, and you can access limited DoD resources, you can access those using a one-time passcode that is sent to your phone or your email. But as a person moves forward within the process, they would have to be transitioned to stronger MFA before gaining access to more resources. One thing that is important to note about this memo, and it's a gap, and it's surprising that it wasn't addressed, is a requirement for authenticators to be phishing resistant. Agencies like CIST and NIST have warned about the legacy authentication methods like one-time passcodes and how vulnerable those can be. But the memo still allows the department to continue using those methods like one-time passwords. At the same time, this is something that lawmakers addressed in the 2026 NDAA, the Defense Policy Bill. Lawmakers required the department to come up with a strategy by May on how DoD will use phishing-resistant authentication. And the department is also required to start phasing out those authenticators like one-time passwords by 2027. So this guidance will most likely be changed.
So it sounds like there's a lot to get through in this, but it does clarify that PKI and not the CAC is DoD's primary credential. Why did DoD need to make that clarification?
Yeah, what I was told is that this is long overdue clarification. For a long time, DoD has been going back and forth between saying that the CAC is DoD's primary credential, and then they would say that DoD PKI is their primary credential. But now the memo clearly states that it's DoD PKI and not the CAC. The CAC is now an example of DoD PKI. So smart cards like the CAC are still very secure means of authentication, but the CAC has been around for over 2 decades. And in that time, the authentication industry, its innovation has evolved significantly. There are other equally secure tools that are available for use within the department. And so what I was told is that whether a PKI certificate is carried on a CAC or on an approved alternative like a YubiKey, that shouldn't really matter. What matters is that it's a FIPS 140 validated hardware token that can protect that certificate.
And so how should authorizing officials think differently when they're approving authentication methods under this new guidance? Do they have new requirements?
I think this memo important about this memo is that it provides a lot more clarity to the officials because so many technologies are emerging and saturating the market. Both government officials and vendors are kind of not clear on which products to use and when. Sometimes vendors claim that their products are FIPS 140 validated. Come to find out they're not. So it's not very easy for program officials to verify those claims. By kind of narrowing this list and having it available to authorizing officials, the department gave its components like a clear guidance on what they can buy.
You mentioned the use cases that the memo lays out, but also that they can change and that this is meant to be a living document. Do folks who've had a look at this and folks that you've talked to think that the list is extensive enough? Does it cover everything?
Yeah, so the document lays out 24 use cases, and what I was told is that that's a pretty extensive list for the first version. But the CIO office, like you said, they said that the document is expected to be a living document, so it would probably be updated once new use cases come up.
Does this mean that the CAC is being phased out and everybody's going to go to tokens of some kind or another?
Probably not. The memo is pretty clear on that point, but we discussed that the department clarified in this memo that PKI remains its primary credential, even though it's not always carried on the CAC. But again, the kind of key issue is not the card itself, but whether the credential is protected by FIPS validated hardware token.
Anastasia, what does this mean for the users themselves? How does this change their experience? And I'm thinking also about defense sites that veterans access, like MyPay and DEERS. They don't have CAC cards to use those now.
This is definitely easing that user experience, making it more convenient to access various resources. For many, it means that they don't have to go in person somewhere to access something, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, technology emerges as the key for states to meet Medicaid work verification rules and avoid coverage gaps before the December 2026 deadline. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A federal mandate now requires states by December of 2026 to confirm 80 hours of work or qualifying activities for Medicaid enrollees each month. Here to explain how automation could help states comply with these complex requirements and protect beneficiaries is General Manager and Senior Vice President at Citizen, Rob Miller. Mr. Miller, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
States are facing some new requirements in determining Medicaid eligibility that go into effect at the end of December. Specifically, they have to verify recipient community engagement. Can you talk us through this change in new requirements? Where does it come from? What's its purpose?
Yeah, so as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we're looking at implementing what we like to call community engagement for the Medicaid expansion population. So sometimes it's commonly referred to as work requirements, but it's really a little bit more comprehensive than that. So we're looking at the Medicaid expansion population and essentially running them through what we like to call our 5-tier verification structure at Citizen. And as part of that, we're looking to essentially identify the folks that we actually need to reach out to. So we may look at different types of data sources. If we have existing records of people already working, if we have existing records of people hitting exemptions, whether that be, pregnancy, Native American, medically frail, whatever that might be, and essentially filtering down as far as we can through an automated fashion to identify the population that we actually need to reach out to that need to come back and either prove that they're working 80 hours a month or find a job or help them do volunteer work and things like that, right? So this is really about trying to put some, I guess you can call it accountability on this particular population as a result of the legislation.
That new requirement can be pretty challenging to validate. I mean, this is a very dispersed population. They may or may not have access to technology. They may or may not have the proof of verification. How do states respond to this kind of new federal mandate?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of our biggest concerns, and I think some of the states as well, is this sort of member abrasion. And we've seen this in a couple of other implementations over the past, let's say 10 years or so, where these types of programs have resulted in members falling off the rosters that really shouldn't have. So our approach is to ensure that sort of reducing member abrasion, almost hopefully as much as to 0%, if you will, is one of our core themes. So we, again, start with what can we do to automatically confirm these folks are good to stay in the program? And that is when we've talked to CMS, their number one goal, right? So the last thing that we want to do is have to reach out to a member to actually perform this extra check, right? Because like you said, it may be hard to get in touch with them. There may be sort of technical concerns. There may be a various number of reasons, and we need to make this as easy as possible. So another way to handle that, of course, is to reach out to these consumers with that in mind. So there may be folks that have only cell phones. There may be folks going to the library, to get to their computers. There may be folks that are expecting to be able to do this over the phone through paper as well. And so by having all of those sort of different channels available for somebody that may be 20 years old versus, somebody that's in their 60s, right? And having those different paths will hopefully make it so that we can reach those members in a clean way and ensure that the right people are staying covered at the right time.
Many of these folks that are covered by Medicaid may also be receiving benefits through other programs. We've seen new work requirements go into place with SNAP, for example. So when we think about validating individual eligibility, are we looking across all of these different benefit programs to try to only have to validate them once, or do they have to validate themselves in every single eligibility program?
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a state-by-state approach. I think we do see a lot of siloed states where, some of their systems are in different places, which does require, members, unfortunately, to have to do those different types of checks. We were just at a conference the other week and heard about a state talking about 80 different portals with 80 different logins for members, which is not a great user experience, let's put it that way. I think one of the things, that we can do from a technology perspective is help sort of bridge those different silos. And we did that in Mississippi, actually, where we took about 15 different state and federal data sources across different agencies and connected the Human Services and the Department of Medicaid together so that once somebody makes a request, to apply for SNAP, and then maybe they also then apply for Medicaid at the same time, which happens often, right? Those transactions continue to sort of funnel through us, and we'll identify that so that, one, they're not getting double charged for those checks to the different, credit bureaus and what have you for property and things like that. But more importantly, right, that data can come back to the state, immediately as well if it's available. So there's technical sort of technology, solutions, if you will, to help bridge that gap. But that is certainly going to be something that we might expect. Now, one other thing I think is important on your question specifically around SNAP is that we've already received, as part of that sort of 5-tier filter, if you will, that we're going to try to go through when we get the Medicaid expansion population, is if you're on SNAP or TANF, there's already additional checks being done on those other programs that will already put you basically into good compliance for this program. So that is actually one of the automated checks we're going to have is somebody's already on one of those other programs, particularly SNAP and TANF. That's an already elimination for us to have to reach out. We're already going to basically check off to say that you're good to, to stay in the program without us, doing any additional verifications.
I'm speaking with Rob Miller. He's General Manager and Senior Vice President at Citizen. We mentioned the Medicaid requirements up front. Really, states are only getting months to not only receive these new mandates, but have them implemented, which is like lightning speed in terms of tech innovation. And every single state has to do it themselves. What are you seeing in terms of state compliance? Are they ready? Are they not? Are some states ahead of this game?
That's a great question. I think everybody's still waiting, to be honest with you, with the formal guidance from CMS. And there's been some things that have come out already as well. I think one of the things that we talk about is sort of not starting from, home base, if you will, right? We're starting from third base. And the reason why is because through And then Softeon, we had done a lot of this work in Kentucky back in 2018 when they were looking to implement work requirements. So we had a pretty decent idea of what we might expect to see from a state, as well as the potential flexibility that we might see different states try to implement as well. And so I think a couple of things we're going to see. One, we're not going to see likely a lot of RFPs coming out, requests for proposal, because of the timeline. It may take 3 or 4 months just to get all the approvals in place, just to publish something, a couple months before you get responses, a couple months after that before you're able to evaluate that. And right then we're already looking at in September of next year, and that's going to be too late. We're looking at probably having to have systems in place by June, certainly notifications and communications going out to members, definitely by September, if not sooner than that as well. Because if we're looking for members to comply with this in January 2027, they need to be notified again, back to our point, our chat a little bit earlier about this, they need to be notified much sooner. So we do think states are probably a little bit behind just because of the timing and the lack of maybe full clarity on what's expected from a detailed sort of policy perspective. So what we're seeing is a lot of states look towards their existing vendors. And so our strategy on the citizen side, we have a bunch of existing customers, but we're also talking to the bigger sort of system integrators as well to help them, because they are also tend to be slower to respond as well as a bigger organization. I think the one biggest concern I think we have in general with that is that we don't want them to use that as an opportunity to make another buck. And one of our biggest missions at Citizen and Softeon is to make healthcare affordable, accessible, and plentiful. And we really do believe that. In fact, we spoke about one of the previous conferences about being able to split the cost of the implementation. That's not something I think some of the bigger guys would talk about, doing. They'll use an opportunity to charge the same amount in each different state as they see it, customize it to crazy. When maybe CMS comes out and makes a policy change, that'll be a change order. That's just not exactly how we operate. And so we want to make it easy and sort of something where they can sort of define their budget, ahead of time and not worry about having all these extra costs as we work towards the implementation date.
You mentioned that you and Citizen have worked through these kinds of programmatic changes in the past. What have you found with the beneficiary population? Do they understand the new requirements? Are they going to be prepared to meet them? And what happens to their coverage if they're not?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if they don't hit it, right, they're going to lose, coverage. And that's certainly the last thing, back to our mission, right, the last thing that we want. And so we want to make sure that the communications are clear, they're easy to receive, but we can go through any channel, whether it be a text message, a letter in the mail, an email, a push from a mobile app or whatever it might be, right? All of those different potential channels to get to those members. I think there's going to be a lot of educating that's going to need to happen as part of this, because it's going to be new for some folks. And I can't imagine everybody sitting there watching and reading through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So we're going to need to make sure that folks are communicated to properly, which is why that sort of timeline is even more crunched, as we talked about, than it is, because we don't want to send that letter to them on, December, expecting them the month after to just be ready for it. So that communication is going to be really key.
And are states adequately funded to do both the modernization and the outreach that's going to be required to bring folks across the spectrum into compliance with these new requirements?
Well, I think, yeah, so there's definitely going to be some federal funding available to them and sort of the typical, 90-10 rules, but it is going to be a challenge. And I think we've already talked to a few states on the citizen side where, they've reached out to their existing vendors. And again, they're sort of seeing major dollar signs just to analyze the requirements. And so that's something where we come in hopefully and can be a little bit more nimble and agile than they can and help these states out. Because again, our mission here is to help sustain the program and ensure nobody gets dropped off the rails, not to make a quick buck off of some, impending, legislation, if you will.
I've been speaking with Rob Miller. He's General Manager and Senior Vice President at Citizen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the news cycle for defense contractors is not slowing down as 2026 gets started. But first, the SNAP program is under pressure and states are drowning in paper as new mandates kick in. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Stricter federal compliance rules and mounting backlogs have exposed a critical weakness in how states process SNAP benefits. Modernizing document workflows in these outdated, paper-heavy systems could be the key to faster, more accurate aid delivery for millions of families. Andrew Joyner, CEO of Hyperscience, is here to share how AI can help solve the paperwork bottleneck. Mr. Joyner, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
We're going to talk about a very important program today, the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We got a glimpse of just how important this was during the government shutdown when those benefits were paused. You've worked with this program very closely and with the state administration of this. Tell us about some of the biggest challenges states have in administering the SNAP program.
Well, certainly. Look, it's the largest anti-hunger program in the U.S. I think approximately 42 million Americans rely on this benefit to help put food on the table. And look, the most recent requirements are that you submit for the eligibility of this program. And so the states administer that eligibility on behalf of the federal government. It's about a $100 billion entitlement program that we fund through taxpayer assistance. So it's quite a large program, quite a large amount of Americans, and it does put food on the table. And it's administered and paid out on a monthly basis. And that eligibility is administered by the states, who essentially have to go by applicant, household by household, to ensure the right amount of a benefit is paid to those individuals.
The application process itself is pretty backward, maybe. It's still in paper. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed last summer added additional application requirements. What do you see in terms of the strain that puts on the state administrating agencies?
Well, we like to call it the big, beautiful bottleneck. I think everyone wants to get this assistance out to the families that need it. But at the heart of this application and eligibility process are documents supporting your eligibility. Firstly, you have to submit your identity, right? That you're a citizen and a resident of the state. You have to submit actually your essentially income, and your income eligibility determines the amount of benefit you get. So those are things like pay stubs, bank statements. If you're a head of household, you may have to submit utility bills. So it's quite a lot of paperwork that has to get processed and adjudicated to get the benefits. We've typically tried to use caseworkers along with system integrators, we call them, which are large consulting companies that try to help administer this benefit. The reality is 44 states are failing essentially what we give as a payment error rate. So that is what percent of errors can you make in your determination of the benefit? And then the second part is you need to pay the benefit within 30 days. And the average eligibility payment is about 26 days. So it's taking quite a long time to get the payments. And 44 states are above the error rate, which is 6%. And the problem with that is the government can withhold dollar for dollar anything above 6% that you're paying incorrectly. They can withhold that and payment to the states. So it's quite a stressful environment in that we've got a time period to pay essentially this assistance, and you need to pay it accurately. And both those are stressful to the states.
You've said that the problem is not the portal, it's the paper. The fact that this application process still happens in paper with all kinds of challenges that poses. This seems like a tailor-made AI solution environment. How could we bring more technology into the process to streamline the evaluation of these applications?
Well, it's a great question, and that's what Hyperscience, the company that I run, is really focused on trying to do on behalf of the states. So there's quite a huge human impact here. So the CIAs, the folks at the HHS organizations, essentially are stressed because now twice the amount of the paperwork is now flowing in. And if you're using caseworkers and system integrators to process that, you've essentially doubled your bill. And that's how you scale labor. So AI can help reduce the amount of administrative burden that the states are going to have to take on to essentially handle twice the paperwork. But then you move to the caseworkers themselves who are trying to review this paperwork and calculate the accurate payment of these benefits. And they spend more than 80% of their time essentially addressing manual type efforts and paperwork, like correcting when the papers get scanned in, they're upside down, they've got torn, they're not clear, they have messy handwriting. The pay stubs themselves are complicated tables. And so calculating payroll deductions, all of that is complicated. Really, humans were not built to do this at scale, but AI, especially with something like hyperscience, which was purpose built to read human-friendly information at scale, can really help reduce the amount of errors that the humans are making when they have to process 42 million of these on a monthly basis. And so we can read all of the documents. Essentially, we can make sure that everything's in good order, that you've submitted the right identity documents, that you've submitted the right pay support information or head of household information. So we can make sure everything's in good order before you go off and go back to work and go on and do something. That's typically a big delay in the process. Then we can accurately extract the information so the caseworkers aren't having to sift through messy handwriting, multiple languages. The AI can handle all that. And then really what the caseworker can focus on is really helping the applicants understand if they're missing documentation, if there's gaps in their documentation, what they need to do to meet the policy to get the payment more quickly. They can focus on those human aspects. And I think that's a win-win at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the reason why there's twice the paperwork, one side of the spectrum is trying to reduce fraud. They're also trying to make sure the eligibility is going to the folks who are eligible for it. So that's one side of the spectrum. There's another side of the spectrum that wants to make sure that an accurate amount of benefit is paid and is broadly accessible. And so at the heart of this is let's just get through the paperwork as efficiently as possible. And this is an area where AI scales naturally, and AI can really help the caseworkers. It can help the CIOs who are stressed, and then it can also help the applicants who really want this benefit quickly.
I'm speaking with Andrew Joyner. He's the CEO of Hyperscience. You mentioned earlier that 44 states are failing to meet the performance requirements embedded in the SNAP program. Why aren't more of the states picking up on some of these technology solutions to help make the processing easier, reduce their backlog?
Well, it hasn't been a technology like Hyperscience that works across such a broad spectrum of documents. And because we have to administer this to these applicants, the best way to do it is through caseworkers. It just happens to be a high turnover job because it's quite stressful. There's time barriers, about 30 to 40% attrition rates of the caseworkers nationwide. So it's quite a high stress. And that has really only historically been the best way. There haven't been a good set of technologies that allowed states to administer this quickly and at scale. AI, the advancements have come so quickly that now, no matter what the types of documents that are being submitted, whether it's the form that's being submitted, whether it's the identity documents that validate what was on the form, it's the income requirements that are also specified on the form. We can do now those kind of cross-document comparisons at scale and with high accuracy because of the power of AI. And so I think most of the states within the next 18 months have no choice but to adopt a technology like AI to assist with the administration of these programs. We've already done this at the Social Security Administration in one of the largest document programs issued by the government. We do it for over 250 million Americans to make sure that that assistance is paid out when you submit your Social Security claims. And we also do it for the Veteran Affairs Association, right? There's over 11 million veterans who are submitting complex documents to get their claims reimbursed for all their medical assistance, a very important constituency. They used to wait over 3 to 6 months to get their claims adjudicated, but with the help of AI, we've now gotten it down to less than 3 days. So these are the types of things that I think most states will start adopting because the results are measurable and there's quite a big human impact that we can produce on the other side of it.
You mentioned some other examples of casework in programs across the federal government, VA, Social Security, other sorts of benefit programs. If AI is deployed to really improve this caseworker customer interaction and streamline the process, what needs to come next? Are there new policies, new oversight functions, new governance mechanisms to make sure that we keep private information private and that information flows smoothly and that customers receive the benefits they're entitled to?
It's a great question. The federal government is really leading the way in the ethical use of private information and forms of delivering efficacy with the government. So what we're able to provide the states is their own state instance where the citizens and residents of that state that benefit from AI, all of their information never leaves the jurisdiction of the state. It runs locally. And we have safeguards in place where if information is extracted from the program, we can redact, we can use synthetic information to help train the models. And so there's actually quite a leadership position that the U.S. government and the states are able to take in the handling of information to help adjudicate some of these government processes. We've used it for logistics, for warfare, for a number of different reasons all throughout the U.S. government. The U.S. government has some of the strictest safeguards in terms of security and governance of information with the FedRAMP and now StateRAMP programs. And so we've gone through that process with hyperscience as an example to ensure that leaders and information professionals who lead these states know that the information and the handling and the use of AI will meet the highest and stringent safeguards that they've put in place.
I've been speaking with Andrew Joyner. He's the CEO of Hyperscience. Really appreciate your perspective on this and the hope that there's opportunity for progress.
I think there is. Thank you again for all your questions and your time.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, the news cycle for defense contractors is not slowing down as 2026 gets started. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Department of Defense has unveiled its first wave of 31 class deviations under the revolutionary FAR overhaul, aimed at cutting red tape and accelerating procurement. At the same time, a draft executive order could impose new limits on buybacks, dividends, and executive pay for defense firms. Here to walk through what these changes might mean for industry and mission delivery is Stephanie Castro, president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, great to have you on this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, Terry, as always.
We are in our first full week of January, and we've started it with big news over the weekend, the capture of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. What impact does that have on the government contracting community? Tell us what you're hearing.
We have started 2026 with a bit of a surprise for some of us, right? And in terms of contractors, contractors have long been involved in U.S. engagements around the world. This is no different. And so as we move forward in terms of whether it's military operations or if it's critical infrastructure protection for oil and gas lines in Venezuela, et cetera, depending on where the White House wants to go with this plan they have, contractors will be certainly a part of that. We've heard in the news media about the president talking to oil and gas companies. I would also say government contractors have a role to play in what's coming up. And I hope that we can collaborate and cooperate with the White House, with the agencies involved, to make sure that contractors' voices are being heard and that we're being used effectively.
We're certainly going to hear more about that over the next few days as the operation unfolds. But let's change topics a little bit. Still looking forward to what you're hearing in 2026. The revolutionary FAR overhaul was a big topic in 2025, and now it's playing out in practice. What are you seeing in the Department of Defense's class deviations?
Well, we are seeing a lot of activity, Terry, over the holidays. And, to go back a little bit into the revolutionary FAR overhaul, which is this massive rewrite of the federal acquisition regulations, we saw lots of class deviations released from the FAR Council last year. And, there was direction from the president as part of this overhaul to undertake a rewrite of all the supplements of the FAR. And every agency has its own supplemental documentation regarding the acquisition regulations. And the Department of Defense, Department of War, they have one of the largest supplements, if not the largest supplement. And so undertaking a rewrite of that documentation is a massive effort as well. In mid-December, on December 19th, we saw coming out of the department 31 separate class deviations that would take effect here on February 1st, which is not too far away, and that they'll guide contract writing until the formal rulemaking process can catch up. So this was a large tranche of phase 1 class deviations, and we were unpacking the 31 pieces of language as we speak. In addition to the actual changes to the DFARS language are changes to non-statutory policies and procedures that are found in what's called at the department Procedures, Guidance, and Information, or PGI. This is the supplemental body of work to the supplement itself. And so as we go through all of these documents, it's really important for contractors to look at them carefully, figure out how they'll impact their work, their business, and the mission of the agency that they're supporting, and to give feedback to the Department of Defense, Department of War, regarding how these are going to play out.
What are you seeing in the first 31? What stands out to you, at least in the initial look?
So there are several that do stand out to me, Terry, so thank you for asking. We've had this conversation, you and I, before about this push in the government to go towards commercial products and commercial services. And when you think about the Department of Defense, you think about a lot of the very bespoke military-focused products and services or solutions, but they do actually acquire lots and lots of commercial services and commercial products. And we heard this in the November 7th Arsenal of Freedom speech from Secretary Hegseth about this need to incorporate more commercial components to what the department is acquiring. And so when I looked at the class deviations, I saw some of the subparts on applicability of certain laws for commercial products, commercial services, and commercially available off-the-shelf items, which I love that acronym, COTS, commercially off-the-shelf items. But that was one of it. I also saw a lot of activity there on simplified acquisition procedures. So they've retained rapid contracting for combatant commanders authority within the DFARS and some other special contracting methods. So this is really reflective of what we've seen in the FAR overhaul, but the more specific to the service members and the warfighters.
I'm speaking with Stephanie Castro. She's president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, there are contractors who work across agencies. How are they keeping track of all these deviations if every agency has their own new rule book?
It is such a challenge, Terry, to think through. You've got the FAR, which is what governs so much of acquisition within the federal space, but every single agency does have its own supplement. And so they're trying to make sure that they're aligned, or at least not misaligned. That said, it is a challenge for your run-of-the-mill contractor, particularly for small businesses who don't necessarily have the resources or the knowledge base to go, hey, this is tweaked in this way, but that other agency is tweaking it in a different way, and that's what it means for my business. And so I understand that there will be training opportunities that the government's putting together, not just for government employees and the contracting officer and the acquisition corps, but also for contractors. And I'm encouraged that, it will be coursework that both the contracting officers in the government and the contracting folks outside the government can take together and understand what is going on. But you've put your finger on one of the major complications that we're facing, which is, okay, the FAR is being changed, but all of the agencies are going to interpret changes differently for their own purposes. And what does that mean for industry?
And you mentioned that the new DFARS deviations go into effect 1 February. Do contractors have an opportunity right now to provide feedback, or is this a done deal?
So the class deviations are out. We do have a line of communication open to folks at the department to say, hey, this could be an unintended consequence of this particular phraseology or language, et cetera. They will take effect February 1st. I believe that they're open to modifying them before the actual rulemaking process starts. And we're hoping that as a trade association, PSC, we have 400 member companies. We'll go out to them and say, hey, what is a burr under the saddle, or what is a real sticking point for you here? And we'll convey that, or they can convey it themselves. There seems to be an openness to receiving that feedback. But again, not sure what they'll do with it, particularly as different supplements from different agencies may be misaligned. And so again, it's very complicated. And I think we'll be playing this out through all of 2026.
Well, speaking of complications and burrs under the saddle, also over the holidays, there was a leak of a draft executive order that might limit buybacks, dividends, and executive compensation for military and defense contractors. What are you hearing about that?
So it's been fairly quiet on that since last you and I talked, Terry. There was an executive order, as you mentioned, in draft form that was being discussed in the media. We still haven't seen the language. We haven't heard much more about meeting with decision makers about that. We are very hopeful that when language does come out or is shared, or if these conversations happen, that the White House and others will be open to contractor feedback regarding how this impacts industry. I would mention, PSC, we often highlight, as I did earlier in this discussion, we have 400 member companies. Collectively, our companies between commercial and government contracts contribute $1 trillion to the U.S. economy. And that's just our 400 member companies. So we are a big player in the national economy between commercial and government contracts. And so as we have these discussions, I hope that concerns will be taken under advisement.
Even the leak of this executive order had immediate impact in the stock market. What are you hearing from your member companies about the potentially negative effects of these requirements?
Yeah, it's interesting, Terry, that, these new requirements, as I understand, again, haven't seen the language, but as I understand they've been drafted, would have impacts on shareholders, would have impacts on the broader economy. And already the rumor of it had an impact on some share prices. And so, again, I really hope that as we work together, we've had a long history of public-private partnership and of collaboration with the government. And again, we are here to help with federal missions and making sure the taxpayers in America get what they're paying for in terms of mission success, whether it's Internal Revenue Service or the Department of Defense, Department of War, or Homeland Security, Border Security, et cetera. But these companies need to remain viable. They need to remain able to pay their workers, able to do the work themselves. And so that is the conversation that we want to have about the longer term impacts of some of these potential actions. And I hope, again, that the government will take that under advisement.
It sounds like anybody who was hoping that 2026 might get off to a little bit of a slower start is going to have to adjust their expectations pretty quickly.
I hope people got some rest between the various holidays, because we're hitting the ground running here in 2026.
I've been speaking with Stephanie Castro. She's the president of the Professional Services Council. Stephanie, thanks as always.
Thanks, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Department of Veterans Affairs is embarking on big changes next year. It's looking to get the rocky rollout of the new electronic health record back on track. VA medical facilities already using the system have been beset with problems for years. Meanwhile, the VA is planning to roll out the biggest reorganization of its healthcare operation in decades. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more. Jory, 2025 had a lot of changes. 2026 is going to bring more. You cover the VA on a regular basis. What are you looking at?
So first things first, the Veterans Affairs Department, they are looking at getting its rocky rollout of an electronic health record back on track. This has been a persistent problem across multiple administrations. This is a contract that was actually signed in the first Trump administration. And what we saw in recent years is that this new system, which is built by Cerner and now is part of Oracle bought the company some years ago, it has been a struggle for the facilities that have been using this system. In fact, since April of 2023, the program has been on a reset, meaning that there are no new go-lives of the system at VA facilities, and it's been on pause contingent on these facilities showing improvements in productivity, basically getting back to where they were before the go live in terms of productivity, in terms of user satisfaction, in terms of results of delivering healthcare to veterans. It's been a situation where both parties in Congress have been very concerned about this project. It has been ballooning in cost. It's a multi-billion-dollar project. And for what it's worth, the DoD has actually completed its rollout of the same EHR. The whole point of this is that it would be interoperable between DoD and the VA, and that service members, once they leave active duty military service, that they would have their records available to the VA and it would be seamless in terms of that healthcare. But at this point, VA is encountering many more problems than what DoD ever encountered.
Well, I hope they're taking all of those lessons learned into the future. What does the plan for EHR look like going forward?
So at this point in time, the VA is looking at going live at 13 new sites in 2026. This is going to first focus on 4 sites in Michigan. And what we heard recently from Dr. Neil Evans, he's the acting program director of VA's Electronic Health Record Modernization Integration Office. He says that these are actually going to be simultaneous go-lives. It won't be this sequence of one after another after another. Here's what he had to say at a recent House VA committee hearing of the Tech Modernization Subcommittee.
This approach allows us to scale up the number of deployments, enhance efficiencies, and improve the sharing of best practices within and between markets.
So that was Dr. Evans talking about the path forward here. It's worth pointing out that the Government Accountability Office is concerned about this simultaneous go-live approach. They say that it introduces more complexity to a project that has already been beset with problems, and that they say that this raises concerns in terms of whether it will work out the way that VA intends.
So GAO has concerns. What do lawmakers make of this plan?
They are just as well concerned. We heard from the chairman of the subcommittee, Tom Barrett. He is representing a district in Michigan, so he has very vested interest in how these go-lives go in his state. There's kind of a split feeling about all of this, where at some point, lawmakers want this project to be complete. It has been stalled, and they've been throwing a lot of money at this project for not a lot of results. But at the same time, lawmakers are equally concerned that this is actually a system that delivers better outcomes for veterans, because there have been instances where veterans have been harmed from this EHR situation. There have been pharmacy mix-ups. There have been instances that Congress acknowledges where this has resulted in the deaths of veterans. It's contributed to those deaths in some way. Here's Barrett spelling out some of the concerns that he and so many other lawmakers have.
This timeline is locked in and the countdown is on, but the question remains, when the switch is flipped in April, will the system deliver and will it do what we need it to do? Or are we going to run into snags like we have in the past? For millions of veterans relying on VA hospitals and staff supporting them, this is not something that is theoretical. It's real, it's happening, and we have to do it right.
Well, the EHR itself is a huge task, but what other reforms is the VA looking at for 2026?
Yeah, so in addition to everything we've been talking about, the VA is also embarking on a major reform of the Veterans Health Administration. This is the largest shakeup of VHA in decades. What this is going to mean, we haven't gotten a lot of details on just yet, but what we do know is it's going to reduce the number of Veterans Integrated Service Networks, or VISNs, from 18 down to 5. VISNs are these kind of multi-state groupings of the greater United States, where they are regional hubs where they address regional needs of veterans. And so that's going to be shrinking. One thing that VA Secretary Doug Collins has mentioned here is that this is a reform that is not going to result in the workforce at VA being cut. There's some things worth pointing out as far as caveats. VA this year did reduce its headcount by 30,000 positions. VA managed this entirely through voluntary separation incentives. There were no RIFs as the VA initially contemplated. But it is worth pointing out internal documents that I and other outlets have obtained suggest that the VA is actually going to be not filling some of its vacant positions going forward. The VA, as agency watchdogs and GAO has documented in the past, always deals with an acute shortage of some VA medical positions across its network. There's always more people than they always are in need of certain positions that are essential to healthcare delivery. And so VA in some way is saying that they don't need to hire as much as they have in the past. In fact, they're going to let some of these positions remain unfilled. Collins in the past, however, has been adamant that the headcount of VA doesn't necessarily translate into its results for veterans, that it can still meet its healthcare mission without necessarily raising the overall workforce size.
Jory, VA is one of the few agencies that currently has a 2026 appropriation. What are you hearing from Capitol Hill about their concerns and their interests at VA going forward?
So VA is a big place. It's the largest agency behind the second only to the Pentagon. And lawmakers that have a oversight duty for VA, they've been contemplating how they can get more oversight and a stake in how the VA operates. And so just recently, a number of the top Republicans and some Democrats on the House VA committee, they have proposed basically an NDAA for the Department of Veterans Affairs, where they would reauthorize certain programs. That's something that has not really happened in quite some time. These programs just kind of, once they are created, they exist in perpetuity, and then there are hearings about whether they are successful or not. And so House VA Committee Chairman Mike Bost is leading this effort along with some of his colleagues. This idea that lawmakers are able to take a closer look at what's working, what's not, and if something's not working, whether they need to reform it in some way, whether they need to pull the plug on it and divert those resources somewhere else. These are basically what the lawmakers are trying to accomplish here.
Sounds like there will be a lot to watch in 2026.
No doubt.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.